Today we're continuing to talk about walking bass lines, but before we go further, I wanted to point out that a viewer very studiously pointed out that I left out two kinds of triads in the previous video. I left out the sus2 and sus4 triads, and that viewer is totally right. Thanks for pointing that out and for watching. Now, I did omit them on purpose because I wanted to talk about them in another video. But I probably should have mentioned that when I discussed all the triads. So thanks to that viewer for pointing it out. Welcome to Learn Jazz Bass with Matt Rybicki. If you're interested in getting more videos about playing jazz bass, please subscribe to my channel and like this video if you would, and look for a link below for a free PDF that relates to today's discussion. So as I said, we're talking about walking bass lines and the chromatic approach concept. And chromatic approach notes are very simple ideas. What it essentially means is that we are approaching a given note from a half step above that note or from below that note. So if the note is C, we can approach that note from above, a D flat going to C, or from below, a B natural going to C. Now for our purposes, we're not going to talk about natural half-step movement that occurs in a key or a scale as being a chromatic approach note. We're talking about notes that are outside the key or the scale or the chord of the moment. Chromatic approach notes aren't functional in helping to define the triad or the chord. Well, the triad is a chord, but they are functional in helping the bass line be more interesting and sound better. They add nuance to the primary colors of a triad. If you prefer food analogies, they add spice to a pretty kind of bland dish. So let's take a look at the Ray Brown bass line on Bag's Groove that we looked at last time. If you remember, we analyzed the notes in relation to the chord and we found all the places where basic elements of triads existed. Now you can see next to me here on the screen, I pointed out the places that chromatic approach notes occur. So if you look at measure 3, for example, you'll see there's a D sharp on beat 2. That note is a chromatic approach note to the E natural that comes right after. It also very elegantly connects the D natural right before it. So D, D sharp, E, D. That D sharp is not part of the existing triad or chord. It only serves to connect the two notes. It also allows for those notes to land on strong beats. So Ray is placing important notes on important beats. In the very next measure, measure 4, you'll see that he is applying a chromatic approach note to the C natural in bar 5. So on beat 4, in measure 4, there's a D flat going to C, a chromatic approach from above. Right? In measure 5, you'll see we've also got a chromatic approach note back to C, but this time from below, the B natural. Now, why am I calling that a chromatic approach note when B natural is in the key of C major? Well, in the blues form, technically this would be a dominant chord. And so the B that occurs on this chord is actually B flat. So B is not in the chord, and so is an approach note to the following root, the following C. We'll discuss 4-part chords, dominant sevenths, major sevenths, minor sevenths, and so on in other videos. So yes, that B natural is in C major, but in this context, it is a chromatic approach note back to C. Something interesting is happening in measure 6 if you see. He says, right? So what is he doing there? It sort of seems like that C sharp, a chromatic approach note, is going nowhere, right? It suddenly makes a leap to E. Well, if you just sort of pan out a little bit, notice what the note after E is. It's a D. And this might be what we would call a sort of enclosure. So C sharp, E, D is the target note. This is a little bit of a gray area, and I just took the liberty of calling it a chromatic approach note there. It isn't approaching the D directly, but rather indirectly. But I think it's a cool sound. And I think the idea of the chromatic approach still applies because it happens so fast. Jumping to measure 14, or the second bar of the second chorus, you'll see the same kind of basic idea. He plays C. Even though it is separated by an eighth note, he's still approaching the D chromatically from below. C sharp D is the basic idea. You're just sort of extracting that extra eighth note there. In measure 20, I want to ask a question. Why did I label that G natural as a chromatic approach note? Just in case you weren't able to figure it out, the next note, the G sharp, is actually the third of E7. So that G natural, while it's in the key of G, again, is not in the chord E7. It doesn't occur naturally. And so it is purposely a tool to approach the G sharp instead. The remainder of the chromatic approach notes in this Ray Brown selection basically follow the things we just mentioned. What's interesting, you'll notice, is that already we're filling up all the empty spaces for every note. So we're almost at 100% of analyzing every single note over every single chord, and we've only discussed two concepts so far. So Ray is making a huge meal out of just a couple basic ideas. Now at the beginning of this video, we heard Paul Chambers' bass line on If I Could Write a Book from the famous Miles Davis album Relaxin' with the Miles Davis Quintet. Paul Chambers is one of the GOATs to me. In fact, he and Ray Brown are my two favorite players by far. To me, Paul Chambers really epitomizes using chromatic approach notes in his lines again and again. He uses them very effectively, sometimes very slyly, and very confidently. Paul Chambers uses chromatic approach notes so skillfully that it's a bit of a trick to our ears. What I mean by that is the bass line sounds wonderful, but if you analyze it, it's a little weird. Some of it really doesn't kind of make sense. Now this goes to an idea I discussed in my very first video, where we are placing the feel of a bass line above note choices. But also, I'm not saying that Paul is just playing any old go to hell note. In fact, I'm very sure he knew exactly what he was doing. What's really neat to me is that I get a sense that there's almost more going on there than simple quarter notes. It's sort of an illusion that's created by his skillful use of these chromatic approach notes. It has a sort of almost bigger sound in a way because he's very carefully pulling and pushing our ear outside of the expected sounds. Now, if we take a closer look analytically at Paul's line, we could see a lot of places where this chromatic approach effect happens. So going on to measure 4, that A natural does not occur in the minor chord, nor in the B flat 7. So really it functions as a chromatic approach note from below to the B flat. A natural to B, da, 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 da. The important note there is the B flat. He's using the A natural to get there. The same kind of basic idea applies in measure 6 as well. If you notice, he's got an E natural there, although in C minor, as we learned from the last time, it should be an E flat. But that E natural is approaching the downbeat of F minor, and he's playing an F on the downbeat, so he is strongly pulling us to that downbeat and to the root on that downbeat, which is this really strong sound that we go for in walking bass lines. In measure 6, you'll see a common thing that Paul does on minor chords, and that is to get to the flat 7. In this case, we've got the chord of C minor. Flat 7 is B flat. He's getting there chromatically. He's playing C, B natural, B flat. And to me, this really adds some color to this minor sound. That's technically a major 7 that occurs very fast on a minor chord, and so gives it this just a little bit of juice, a little bit of spice. Now measure 22, you'll see he reverses that idea. He's actually starting on the flat 7, B flat on a C minor chord. He's going B flat, B natural, C. So he's connecting to that C, an important part of that chord, the root of that triad or of that chord. He's getting there with that chromatic approach from below the C, so B to C. This same basic kind of idea applies in the next couple measures, where he is connecting the F to the D minor chord. He's getting to the root of that D minor chord, a D, by connecting from the 5th of F, C, C, C sharp, F. So he plays. Now, holy cow, measure 25. Whoa, this is so killing. He is playing a chromatic approach note on the downbeat. And that chromatic approach note is kind of a really dissonant note against that chord. The sound there is a C minor 7. He is starting that bar with a B natural, which does not fit in that chord at all. And he plays the C on beat 2. So he doesn't leave us hanging long. He gets to that resolution, he gets to that root right away. But to start that measure on B is so bold and gives that moment, again, such flavor. I think it's very, very slick and I really enjoy it. And to play it on the downbeat is such a bold move. It sounds so cool too. Right? There's the C there. So that statement of the root is delayed just slightly, giving it a little bit of a sort of off-kilter thing that makes your ears go, what was that? So that's really interesting what he's doing. Jumping ahead to measure 35, I think this is a really good example of how chromatic approach notes can sort of get us out of painting ourselves into a corner. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at the line here, you'll see that Paul plays the root on the downbeat, E flat. D natural is the 7th, that's part of the chord. Now he plays C on beat 3. But following bar, there's another C. How do I get to that root or get to a sound that works with that chord when I have just played where I want to be going? So he continues the line down chromatically, so it's C then B natural, so that on the downbeat of the next bar, C minor 7 is the chord, he's playing that flat 7 on the downbeat again, B flat. So he found a way to quickly resolve the issue of him having just played something that he was gonna play later. That B flat is occurring on a C minor chord. And he quickly goes to that C minor again. Like that, he gets to that C pretty quickly. So chromatic approach notes really help us to sort of guide our way through little mazes that we set up for ourselves as we improvise these lines. We're not perfect machines, we make mistakes all the time. We're trying to play what we intend to play, but we can't always do it. And so this chromatic approach idea not only makes your line sound interesting, but helps get you out of these little jams and allows you to continue on your role of helping to define that harmony and make pretty melodies. Paul Chambers is the master of using this approach. He's also a master of soloing. He's a master of swinging. He's a master of ideas. He's a master of everything. If you don't know Paul Chambers, really get into him right now. It is going to change your bass life.